Good evening and welcome to Scarlet 7. My name is Patryk Witkowsky and we are joined today by William Duguid, a writer and frequent contributor to the show. Hello, good to have you, William.
Good to have you too. Good to be back on screen at last.
Glad to hear it. Obviously, we have a slightly delayed show today, but I'm sure we'll make good time and catch back up. Starting with our first story, we've got a Ukraine update, day 1087 of the conflict. Moldova and NATO member Romania announced they have summoned Russia's ambassadors after its drones struck their territory. Russia has been targeting port infrastructure in Ukraine's south, close to the borders with Romania and Moldova. Shahed drones violated our airspace. Two exploded on our soil, putting Moldovan lives at risk. As part of Moscow's criminal war on Ukraine, said Moldova's president, Maia Sandu. According to Moldovan authorities, two drones crashed in fields, and drone fragments were later discovered in a third location. In Romania, Russia's envoy was also summoned by Bucharest after radar systems identified an aerial target violating airspace, and searchers later found drone fragments, determining that two drones that carried explosive charges on board were destroyed when they hit the ground. There were feelings of anger and betrayal on the streets of central Kiev after Donald Trump's calls with Vladimir Putin. Sean Walker and Artem Mizulin write from Kiev, saying, "There is no certainty that this war will end for us, because Trump does not perceive us as an equal party in these negotiations," said Alexei, 34. Serhiy, a 39-year-old soldier, said Trump had been, quote, Putin's doormat during this last presidency, and although he was skeptical about negotiating with this bastard, as quoted, referring to Putin. He said that we do have to negotiate, but on Ukraine's terms. Roman 20 said it was obvious for Trump to call Putin, and direct contact should have been established earlier. I'm glad that the parties have started to find a common language, though I'm afraid at what cost. On the Russian side, Putin has won the first round of negotiations, says a source in the Russian foreign policy establishment, telling Pyotr Sauer. A direct call with Trump was precisely what Putin has been waiting for. Zelensky had repeatedly urged Trump to speak with him first upon engaging with Putin. Instead, Trump did the exact opposite, gloated Sergei Markov, a popular Russian commentator. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said peace negotiations could not be left to Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin alone, and Ukraine would not accept a deal made that was. He said it was unpleasant that Trump had spoken to Russia before Ukraine. The EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, said that if a deal was made without Ukraine, quote, the Ukrainians will resist and we will support them. Kallas accused Washington of appeasement towards Russia, insisting that no deal behind our backs, as quoted, could work. You need the Europeans, you need the Ukrainians, she said. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz rejected any dictated peace, arguing that a Russian victory or a Ukrainian collapse will not lead to peace. On the contrary, this would put peace and stability in Europe at risk far beyond Ukraine. Ukraine appeared to concede on Thursday that it was holding a third of the territory in Russia's western Kursk region that it initially captured during a shock offensive in 2024. The figure is down from previous claims of 1,400 square kilometers. Kiev said Moscow attacked Ukraine with 140 drones overnight into Thursday, injuring one person in the Izmail district of the Odessa region. Out of the 140 drones, the Ukrainian Air Force said it shot down 85, while 52 did not reach their targets, probably due to electronic countermeasures. William, passing over to you. It seems like we have an update here with a lot of different voices and trouble across different sides of many different borders. What does that indicate?
It indicates that things are getting a bit chaotic, and Maybe that's chiming in with Trump and JD Vance today getting involved with the whole process. Um, it looks as if Russia's drones, first and foremost, are kind of all over the place, literally, and that's not a good thing. And you really don't want to see other countries' airspace being violated in that way. What the reason for it is, no doubt, we will never quite know, but let's hope that that isn't repeated. In the meantime, the drone assault on Ukraine continues, including a hit on the outer shell of Chernobyl. There's a name with some resonance. And it's just painfully obvious that some sort of negotiated settlement that produces stability is what's required. The question, however, is whether that can happen. Certainly, it got off on the wrong foot by Trump speaking only to Putin. Whether or not he made he was making the choice between Zelensky and Putin, and they were putting in their individual pitches, I don't know. I just think probably Trump feels Putin is the sort of guy he can do a deal with, and he's maybe not sure about Zelensky because Zelensky isn't a natural politician. It's not what he spent most of his life doing, unlike Putin, who came up through all the channels such as the KGB. It's a very, very complicated situation, and it's difficult to see at this point where the negotiated settlement will come from that everybody's comfortable with, and that doesn't just produce more violence further down the line. So it's still a wait and see, and it's going to be a disturbing situation to watch, perhaps for quite some time to come.
Thank you, William. Moving on to our Middle East update, where at least 48,239 Palestinians have been killed and 111,676 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October in 2025, according to the Gaza Health Authority, that is. Hamas is to release 3 more hostages on Saturday in the 6th hostage prisoner swap under a ceasefire deal with Israel. In exchange, Israel is expected to release 369 Palestinian prisoners and detainees on Saturday, Hamas said. The 3 Israelis to be freed on Saturday are Israeli-Argentinian Lier Horn, 46, Israeli-Russian Alexander Sasha Trufanov, 29, and Israeli-American Sagui Dekel Chen. The hostages' families forum said on Friday that it welcomed the joyous news of a free man's impending release. A freed Israeli hostage said today that Hamas militants starved and tortured him during captivity, as the Red Cross expressed concern over the condition of all those still held in Gaza. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, which has facilitated the ongoing hostage prisoner swaps between Israel and Hamas, said today it was very concerned about the condition of the remaining hostages held in Gaza. Iran accused Israel of disrupting flights from Tehran to Beirut today after a decision barring 2 Iranian planes from landing in the Lebanese capital sparked protest. Israel has repeatedly accused Hezbollah of using Lebanon's only airport to transfer weapons from Iran. Hezbollah and Lebanese officials have denied Israel's claims. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is expected to visit Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates soon to discuss the fragile Gaza ceasefire. Saudi Arabia will host the leaders of the 4 Arab countries at a summit on the 20th of February to discuss Donald Trump's proposal for a U.S. takeover of Gaza, according to agents of France Press, AFP. Speaking on the condition of anonymity, a source told AFP that the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, would also attend. 14 Palestinian children, many with cancer, have been flown to Italy for medical treatment, the latest among dozens brought from Gaza after the Hamas-Israel war. The children and their families, a total of 45 people, were flown to Italy on an Italian military plane and greeted at Rome's Ciampino airport on Thursday evening by Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani. Two of Jerusalem's booksellers were detained this week on charges their books were causing, quote, public disorder, and have said the experience reflected an intensifying campaign by the Israeli government against Palestinian culture and free speech. Mahmoud Muna and his nephew Ahmed, whose family has owned the educational bookshop for more than 40 years, spent 2 days in detention and will remain under house arrest until Sunday, despite the absence of evidence to support the vague accusations against them. Turkey will not allow terrorist organizations to take shelter in northern Syria and will not hesitate to take action in that regard, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said. The new Syrian administration under Ahmed al-Sharaa appears to be determined to fight those terrorist organizations, Erdogan said, according to a transcript of his remarks to journalists on his return flight from a trip to Malaysia, Indonesia, and Pakistan. William, what do you make of our Middle East update?
Well, first and foremost, I'm relieved that the fragile ceasefire does appear as if it may get over the problems it's had this week with another exchange of hostages. We will be looking very carefully at the state of the three hostages to be released. We don't quite get to have the same level of care, obviously, or scrutiny rather, about the various Palestinian prisoners, some of whom were admitted to hospital when they were released in the last tranche. However, I think there is cause for concern about the ceasefire in the long term. It was always going to be tricky. I'm not entirely sure that Donald Trump's intervention when things got a bit bumpy, and it was never totally explained exactly what had happened, but his intervention came down, it seemed to me, fairly firmly on one side rather than the other, which is not what you want to see. Nor am I convinced that Marco Rubio is necessarily going to be the best thing that could happen to this process. But the process needs to, fragile as it needs to continue, and it needs to reach some sort of resolution that means we don't just go back to wanton violence again. The Palestinians have suffered quite enough, and of course, the Israeli families whose hostages were taken, their suffering has to come to an end as well. We need to get some sort of normality in this region now, something we haven't seen for decades, but it's desperately needed because we're now at a stage where potentially the seeds for awful things are in there, including potentially the forced relocation of the Gazans, which I think nobody outside of the Trump administration wants to see. Oh, well, obviously the Israelis might wish to see it, but it's no way to long-term peace. So relief, but not really any great optimism going forward. We'll just have to wait and see.
Thank you. Shifting over to the UK, where the UK government departments are reframing expenditure in an attempt to avoid Rachel Reeves's cuts. UK ministers are rethinking their department spending plans ahead of a government review, with Rachel Reeves demanding justification for every pound received to avoid budget cuts. Reports suggest that UK government ministers are working to align their spending with Labour's main priorities, including growth, net zero, crime, education, immigration, and the NHS. The Treasury has warned that any spending that doesn't support these goals could face cuts. Officials are looking for ways to show that their programs contribute to these priorities, with many departments expected to submit final spending plans soon. The Chancellor has set a target of at least 1% budget reduction annually for unprotected departments. In response, ministers are scrambling to link their programs to key government missions. Some, however, are pushing the boundaries with creative justifications, such as arguing that digitizing death records helps boost economic growth by reducing queues at local councils. Other departments are similarly trying to link unrelated areas like flood defenses and waste management to economic growth. The Office for Budget Responsibility is expected to revise economic growth predictions downwards, which could impact the Chancellor's financial plans. Sources say Reeves is committed to sticking to her fiscal rules and avoiding major tax hikes, which means cuts to departmental budgets are likely. Ministries outside of health and defines are preparing for significant reductions in funding to the review progresses. As this review progresses, sorry. William, some potential problems regarding budget and individual group growth. Do you see?
Yeah, we're in a world of
Yeah,
make
how do you
believe,
see this
aren't we?
developing? Sorry.
I'd not come across the term mission washing until today, but this is what we're seeing because everything being being crowbarred into um, what's perceived as the government's priorities, specifically, of course, growth and all sorts of things that, well, maybe at face value would say would not necessarily be growth things, but then again, couldn't you argue that all public spending at some level supports growth? Because if you don't spend the money, there isn't so much money circulating around. So it's all a daft game. This is something out of going back into the past, Yes Minister, or more recently, The Thick of It. It's satire sort of stuff. And it's the sort of thing that happens when a government is fairly incoherent about what the hell it actually wants to do. And that's embodied in all the various promises that were made before the election that turned out to be nonsense afterwards. And now we have the mantra with Rachel Reeves of growth, 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 without any thought as to how it will actually be achieved, and in some cases, totally counterproductive ways of looking at it. So, of course, any department worth its salt that's trying to protect itself is going to come up with fairly crazy rationales for the sort of spending they're trying to do. We should not be living in this crazy world. We should have a grown-up government, but the current Labour government in Westminster is not that, I'm afraid.
Mm. And only adding to those financial pressures, we've got UK firms bracing for fallout from Trump's global trade war. UK businesses are growing increasingly concerned about the potential fallout from the escalating global trade tensions, as US tariffs and new trade policies may negatively affect British exports. The UK is not directly in the line of fire, but the knock-on effects of US tariffs, especially on steel and aluminium, are raising fears among businesses. The UK exports a significant amount of goods to the US, with industries like cars, pharmaceuticals, and scientific instruments being especially vulnerable. The latest move to US President Donald Trump, which includes imposing reciprocal tariffs on a country-by-country basis, has further added to the uncertainty. Experts warn that even if the UK avoids direct tariffs, it could still suffer from broader trade disruptions that slow down international trade. The US is the UK's largest trading partner, with a bilateral relationship valued at nearly £300 billion annually, predominantly in services such as banking and law. However, UK goods exports, which include cars, medicines, and medical devices, are under threat as Trump targets countries with trade imbalances. The new tariffs could make the UK products more expensive, reducing their competitiveness in the US market. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer's government is attempting to balance its relationship with the US while also rebuilding ties with the EU post-Brexit. The UK has been seeking to avoid being dragged into a full-blown trade war, but may need to take a firmer stance. Some experts suggest that Britain's post-Brexit independence could allow Starmer to negotiate better trade deals, but others caution that the UK's smaller size makes it more vulnerable in such negotiations. As the UK economy faces growing uncertainty, business leaders are bracing for the impact. For example, medical device manufacturers like Europlas Technologies, which relies heavily on US exports, are concerned that tariffs could lead to higher costs, reduced competitiveness, and loss of business. Similarly, manufacturers in various sectors, including those in the steel industry, are worried about the ripple effects of US tariffs. The UK government is monitoring the situation closely, but has not yet taken significant action. While some economists argue that the UK could refrain from retaliatory measures, Others warn that avoiding conflict might hurt the UK in the long run. Experts do agree that any disruption in global trade could slow down economic growth, impacting businesses and consumers alike. As President Trump moves forward with his tariff plans, businesses and government officials alike are anxiously waiting the outcome, hoping to navigate the unpredictable global trade landscape. William, a lot of Trump's more sort of targeted tariffs at countries come with a sort of buy-in of a sort of quid pro quo of you can avoid this if you do X thing. That doesn't seem to apply to these more business or manufacturing related tariffs, which are all about bringing businesses back to America eventually in some way. Um, how much will Britain itself be affected by this? How much of our business is going to be competed for in American markets?
I think it's quite likely that if Starmer tries to cozy much up to the US and tries to do some sort of deal, there'll be all sorts of things where America wants in, and I'm thinking here about the health service and things like that. More broadly, I don't think Britain can avoid being affected by what's effectively threatening to be a global trade war started by Trump. It doesn't actually matter if we avoid the direct tariffs because never be quite sure. For example, there's been talk today of VAT being one of the things that is going to attract a tariff from Trump. And despite the fact we're not in the EU, we have VAT. And despite the fact that many of our services that we trade with the US, such as banks and accountancy and the law, not directly subject to tariffs, but carry VAT. And that produces a chilling effect. Investment doesn't happen because people aren't sure whether they're going to be able to export properly, so they don't put money into it. And more broadly, yeah, the global slowdown in trade is almost nailed on if this level of tariff comes in any direction, whether or not it directly affects us. And then you have the big threat to Rachel Reeves' mantra of growth, because that ain't going to happen in a global trade war. It's a mess, and it will stay a mess. And unless Trump is, at some level, using it tactically, as I believe he did with Mexico and Canada, where he did get what appeared to be concessions from them, although they would claim that they were already in place. So, hey, who knows? Um, Unless he's being exceptionally tactical, he runs the risk of running the whole world economy into the sand. And that's not going to help anybody.
Thank you, William. For our next story, we've got electric vehicles and data centers driving global demand for electricity. Global electricity use is expected to rise significantly, driven by electric transport, air conditioning, and AI data centers, potentially raising concerns over rising costs and being able to achieve climate change targets. The International Energy Agency, IEA, has revised its forecast, predicting a 4% annual increase in global electricity demand until 2027, up from its previous estimate of 3.4%. Governments are increasingly adopting electricity for transport, heating, and heavy industry, while the growing use of energy intensive data centers to support artificial intelligence is expected to further drive demand. This rapid increase could strain energy supplies, raise costs, and undermine efforts to reduce fossil fuel reliance in power generation. China is expected to lead the demand growth with a 7% increase last year and a 6% annual rise over the next few years, partly due to the booming solar panel, battery, and electric vehicle industries. In the US, demand is predicted to rise by the equivalent of California's power use by 2027. The European Union is projected to see more modest growth, returning to pre-crisis demand levels by 2027. Experts warn that while clean energy projects are growing, investment in these sources must accelerate to avoid continued reliance on fossil fuels. William, do you think we'll be able to keep up with our energy needs with all of these growing energy markets?
Um, no, there's some contradictions in this whole way that the authorities seem to be thinking about it. Um, uh, we are going to need to either generate more electricity or use less, and maybe the Chinese DeepSeek AI platform, which does seem to use less energy, may turn out to be a way forward. I'm not quite sure what that does to Trump's global trade wars, but that was the last story, so never mind. I, the thing is that if the world is going to be generating more electricity, not all of it is going to be willing to be using clean sources to do that. Trump is going to be doing drill, baby, drill, for example, for what's going to be his greatly enhanced requirement. So there's all sorts of potential issues going on there, and I think that the sort of level of investment that we need to avoid at least using the same fossil fuels, if not increasing the amount of fossil fuels we use, that level of investment just isn't there at the moment. There's too many other complications going on in the world, and we've just covered a whole lot of them. So I think this is just the beginning of what we in Scotland would call a clustered búrach, and we're in the midst of it. And it would be nice to be on the outside of it, watching with a tub of popcorn in the hand. But unfortunately, we'll be facing the consequences of it possibly for quite some time to come.
Difficult times indeed. Thank you. Our next story is waspy women unable to get a stall at next weekend's Scottish Labour Party conference. The SNP has labelled Anna Sarwar, quote, missing in action after media reports that waspy women were unable to get a stall at the next weekend's Scottish Labour Party conference, with campaigners saying they feel shunned by the party. The conference lockout follows the UK Labour government's decision not to compensate the millions of women born in the 1950s. Over 300,000 women, of whom live in Scotland, lost out on pension payments as a result of DWP error, despite the Labour Party's previous promises to compensate them. Waspy campaigner Ann Potter is reported to had said that there has been very little sign of Anna Sarwar, and accused Labour MPs of not wanting to engage with a waspy woman at all. Ms. Potter said that the waspy women felt that they were being used by Labour, making promises of compensation if they got into power. SNP MSP Claire Hoggy, I hope, Claire Hoggy,
Okay.
I'm going to go with, MSP, said the following. This is yet another betrayal of waspy women by Labour. Not content with denying them the fair compensation they deserve, they are now effectively barring them from their conference. And as Sarwar isn't too weak to stand up to Keir Starmer, he's too weak to look. Anas Sarwar isn't just too weak to stand up to Keir Starmer, he's too weak to look waspy women in the eye after promising his promise to them. Mr. Sarwar is missing in action on this matter, churning out empty platitudes while the Labour Party at Westminster remains steadfast in their refusal to compensate these women. Whether on waspy women, Grangemouth, or winter fuel payments, the list of Labour's broken promises is continuing to grow, and it is increasingly clear that they simply can't be trusted. Anas Sarwar has a choice to make. Will he stand up for Scotland's pensioners, or will he keep standing up for Keir Starmer? William, what is the impact of Labour failing on these promises? Where does this leave politics for us, and what sort of recourse do you expect?
Um, well, the long-term recourse will be that Labour suffer electorally. I don't think you get away with breaking promises on the level that they have since the July 2024 election. So not just waspy women, but all sorts of sectors of society, and particularly in Scotland, but not just in Scotland, will show their displeasure at the ballot box. The problem is, where do these votes go? And in Scotland, well, they may go to the SNP. In England, I think very often they will go to Reform, and I'm not sure that that is a solution. It's something else. People are looking for something else. This is something else. Let's go for it. That isn't actually a very wise way to proceed. In terms of the conference itself, uh, I don't think Labour are particularly hitting out at WASPy women. Their treatment of them has been disgraceful throughout. There's no doubt about that. But this is simply now parties aren't giving free stalls at their conferences anymore. It might be advantageous for them to think about doing so, but there's the need to suck in money and to charge for your stalls. And so I suspect that's what they're doing to everybody. And the WASPy women have just been rolled in with that. The era of free stalls appears to be over. It would One party that was enlightened enough, just one party, if they were enlightened enough to not charge for stalls, that might help them electorally. It might make them more popular. It might be a sensible thing to do. But parties don't always think of the sensible thing, do they? And certainly not this Labour Party and not Scottish Labour, who all too often seem to have to make sure Anna Sauer is missing in action, or he gets a grilling as he did from the STV about Grangemouth this week, which doesn't actually reflect very well either.
Thank you, William. And sorry to put you on the spot here, but mostly a personal curiosity, I guess. What sort of stalls would you expect to see, at this specific Labour meeting, Labour conference? What kind of stalls will be there in place of WASPy women, if you know?
I would expect to see things like trade union stalls, maybe Amnesty International, various campaigns involved with what used to be called socialism, but we don't hear very much of nowadays. That sort of thing. Really, the gamut of stalls you would get at any party conference, adjusted for the political outlook of the particular party involved. So most of them would be actually fairly good causes, I'm pretty sure.
Thank you, William. For our next story, we've got Downing Street cleaning and catering staff to go on strike over pay. Cleaners and catering staff at Downing Street are set to begin a month-long strike over pay and conditions, impacting Number 10 and several government departments. The strike, scheduled from February 24th to March 25th, is an extension of ongoing disputes across various government offices. Workers employed by the outsourcing firm ISS are demanding to pay increase and improvements to benefits like holiday entitlement. The Public and Commercial Services (PCS) union also advocates for bringing outsourced staff into official government roles. The strike will affect staff at Number 10, the Cabinet Office, and several other departments, including the Departments for Energy, Security and Net Zero, the Department for Education, and the Department for Business and Trade. The PCS union is covering workers' pay during the strike period. This industrial action highlights the ongoing issue of outsourcing in government departments. The PCS union has pressured the government to fulfill pledges to end the practice of outsourcing jobs like cleaning, catering, and security, despite negotiations. Progress has been slow, with the Cabinet Office maintaining that the responsibility lies with ISS and other external contractors. The cleaners' strike also brings attention to their previously mentioned role in dealing with issues related to lockdown-related parties during Boris Johnson's tenure as Prime Minister. Despite the focus on these issues, workers continue to push for better working conditions and official civil service status. ISS UK has expressed disappointment over the strike, but remains committed to resolving the dispute with the PCS union. William, how do you comment on this?
Well, the underlying problem is the outsourcing of public service contracts, I think. And now there's a sort of blame game going on about who is responsible for sorting out the pay levels. And of course, yes, there is the underlying lack of respect that these guys had when they had to clean up after Boris Johnson. And I suspect that is also rankling a little bit. But this will not be solved because public service contracts will continue to be outsourced for no other reason than it saves money. And that's what Rachel Reeves wants to do. We heard earlier, she wants people to be cutting costs. I mean, it might enhance growth if you took over workers' contracts directly into the public sector and paid them a decent wage. Yes, it might. But hey, everything else is supposedly going to have growth crowbarred into it. So I'm afraid this kind of thing is going to persist unless there's a totally different view of how the government should be running the public finances in general. I really don't see the need for effectively another round of austerity, and I don't think it's inevitable, but it just seems to be what is the manner of thinking of really any government we seem to be capable of electing right now.
Thank you. A judge orders Trump to lift USAID freeze temporarily and allow foreign aid funding. A federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to temporarily lift a freeze on U.S. foreign aid funding, setting a 5-day deadline for compliance. The ruling, issued late Thursday, responded to the financial damage caused by the freeze, which halted humanitarian aid and development work globally. The judge emphasized the disruption caused to nonprofits and suppliers involved in U.S. aid programs. This ruling marks the first legal challenge against the administration's freeze, which has prompted multiple lawsuits from government employees and aid organizations seeking to reverse the dismantling of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. The administration, under President Trump's direction, argues that a freeze is necessary to review foreign aid programs. However, the judge found no rational explanation for a blanket suspension of congressionally approved funds, which had already caused severe financial strain for contractors, businesses, and aid groups. Many organizations report that undelivered supplies, such as food aid, are at risk of rotting or theft due to the freeze. The judge's order requires the administration to inform all organizations with active foreign aid contracts of a temporary lifting of the freeze and to demonstrate compliance by Tuesday. A separate legal challenge also led to a judge blocking the administration's plan to reduce USAID staff worldwide, further highlighting concerns over the safety and stability of ongoing aid operations. The ruling reflects increasing concerns about the administration's handling of foreign aid programs and their impact on global humanitarian efforts. William, passing over to you. I suppose it must be very difficult to be in the mind of a USAID worker, being sort of chucked around, having the president coming after your job, and also this separate body of Doge coming after it as well. What do you make of the sort of constraints and the level of response that the different branches of government are having to Trump or Trump-aligned plans? Are people acting fast enough? Are you expecting more recourse as time goes on? Do these organizations have the backbone and resources to stand up to Trump? How do you imagine this playing out?
I think they probably have the ability to go some way in standing up to Trump and until he works out a way of preventing those things from happening. Right now, it's being done by recourse to legal challenges. This is the first legal challenge for US aid, I believe, and it's correctly, I think, brought out the answer that this was congressionally approved. This funding was congressionally approved. It's in the gift of Congress to decide how it funds things. And I think there's a deeper thing where Trump is going against the correct way of doing things, the constitutional way of doing things. So it'll be interesting to see, firstly, to what extent the Trump government complies, or whether Trump and his cohort will just say, well, you may have got the decision in court, but what are you going to do about it? How are you going to enforce it? Because we are going to keep doing what we're doing. That's where the real danger begins to emerge, because if you start going against legal rulings, then you really are putting aside the rule of law. And that's the thing we don't yet quite know about it, how far that is going to go. Though this is the first of many legal challenges and in many areas, I'm sure. And it's a disaster for certainly the workers who were providing the aid in other countries and the efforts they were making and the causes they were trying to support, but also for the US farmers who I think the figure was quoted as $2 billion worth of orders that they were fulfilling in order to meet US aid's requirements. And suddenly they've been stiffed on all that money and they've had to lay people off. And even if this is resolved, even if Trump complies, the way back for those suppliers is not an easy one because they've had to lay staff off already. So it's the system has been broken and it will take a while to fix. And it'll need people in there who have an inclination to want to fix it. But that goes actually directly against the way this government is operating, where it's breaking things deliberately because that's where it perceives the opportunities as lying. We have not come across this before. And again, if it weren't for the fact that indirectly we're all going to be affected with it, it would be very interesting to see how it panned out. But instead, we have to worry about it.
Thank you, William. 251 new Police Scotland officers are ready to report for duty across the country. Police Scotland's newest officers are preparing to deploy across the country after marking the end of their training during a passing out parade. The 251 strong cohort took part in the official ceremony at Police Scotland headquarters today in front of family and loved ones. Deputy Chief Constable Alan Spears, KPM, thanked and congratulated the probationary constables who will now begin the 2-year probationary period serving their fellow citizens. DCC Spears said the following: Our new officers are ready to begin their policing journey as they prepare to deploy to Scotland's communities. When they discharge their duties, they will do so in line with our values of integrity, fairness, respect, and a commitment to uphold human rights. Policing is a hugely rewarding vocation, and I am grateful of our new officers for their dedication to improving the lives and well-being of Scotland's people and communities. The intake comprises 172 male officers, 68.5% of the overall total, and 79 female officers, 31.5% of the total. Police Scotland are recruiting, and if you are interested in a career with Police Scotland, details are available on the recruitment section of their website at www.scotland.police.uk/jobs. William, do you have a comment for this story? Or was this a parade that you would ever watch?
Well, I don't tend to watch passing out parades very much, but this is a regular occurrence that we have these updates on the number of police that have been recruited. From the looks of it, I dipped into the figures. They have a quarterly report on how many police officers there are in Scotland, because of course it's a question not just of who joins but who leaves. And I looked at the September and December 2024 figures, and it looks as if the total number of police in Scotland is very slightly edging up. So yeah, that's probably a reasonably good sign. But of course, within financial constraints, it's hard to make that go up too far. We do need more police officers, particularly in the rural and remote areas, I think. And so this is a good news story. But no, I don't have any earth-shattering revelations for you on it, I'm afraid.
No worries. Thank you, William. The University of Scotland research finds that a lack of diversity threatens red squirrels' future. A University of Edinburgh study has shown that Scotland's red squirrels have among the lowest genetic diversity of any species, leaving them vulnerable to disease outbreaks. Red squirrels' lack of diversity could explain why they are slow to develop resistances to the squirrelpox virus, which is carried by non-native grey squirrels and is fatal to reds, say scientists. Continued genetic monitoring and interventions are urgently needed to improve red squirrel diversity and boost conservation efforts, experts warn. Genetic diversity is important for species survival, scientists say. It helps populations adapt to environmental change and makes them more resilient to threats such as disease and habitat loss. Red squirrels are endangered in the UK and considered a conservation priority in Scotland, a key stronghold for the animals. Scientists from the University of Edinburgh analysed the entire genetic code of 106 red squirrels from across Scotland and Formby in northwest England to better understand how closely related they are and track the spread of populations. Researchers found that as a species, red squirrels' level of genetic diversity is lower than some of the world's most endangered animals, including the Iberian lynx and the Amur tiger. Their movement across Scotland is restricted by natural and man-made barriers, such as the Cairngorm Mountains in the north and cities in the central belt, creating pockets of isolated populations. The northeast of Scotland remains one of the only areas where the animals are free to move between the north and south. Experts say that translocation of squirrels, moving squirrels between populations, may be one option to enrich their diversity. The new study shows the role genetics can play by moving squirrels to locations to introduce greater genetic variety into populations. William, what do you make overall of Scotland's conservation efforts for different animals?
Scotland tries quite hard to conserve things with, again, with the constraints. Working with landowners, not always an easy thing. Um, but I think we're a fairly well developed in what we know and what we try to do to apply that knowledge. So that's a good thing. The poor red squirrels seem to be up against it because one of the fundamental flaws you can have is lack of genetic diversity. But again, there are potential solutions to that as long as you can apply them in time. If you can't, then yes, you are wide open to an infection coming and taking out large swathes of your population, as has happened with the squirrel pox. But I think we have good enough people to be able to maybe make the solutions work a wee bit now that we know what we're dealing with. And every confidence that we'll still be seeing red squirrels in Scotland for years and decades to come.
Thank you, William. And for our final story, we pay a little bit of service to the special day that is today, being Valentine's, where the Scottish Government calls on the UK government to change family visa rules to help Scots reunite with loved ones. Changes to the UK family visa route would support the well-being of married couples and families by helping them reunite in Scotland, according to a new Scottish Government report. Under current rules, people living in the UK need to earn a minimum of £29,000 to bring any immediate family members from abroad to live here. Planned increase to this threshold was paused in July 2024 by the UK government, which is currently seeking views on whether requirements should continue in their current form. The Scottish Government report sets out evidence that the minimum salary requirement does not support Scotland's interests and disproportionately impacts women and part-time workers. Equalities Minister Cowcub Stewart said the following: "This Valentine's Day, I am calling on the UK government to make the changes needed so that couples and families who do not meet the current financial requirements can be reunited. People who live in Scotland should be able to build a life with their spouse and raise children here, wherever in the world their husband or wife is from. Allowing more people to bring their families to live here would enrich communities, support public services, and contribute to the economy." The UK government's review of the income threshold is welcome, and the Scottish government is clear that their minimum income threshold needs to be reduced or removed altogether to allow more families to build their lives here in Scotland. William, what do you make of restrictions like this? What sort of role do you think they play, and is it necessary for us here in Scotland?
It's the opposite of what we in Scotland need. This is one of the fundamental divides between Scotland and most of the rest of the UK, anyway. But that is to say that what we need in order to increase our population is more people of working age. And therefore, we should be organising and welcoming immigration to Scotland of people that can benefit our economy and become part of our community. Within the UK, there isn't such a perceived need overall. I mean, Scotland may have it, but frankly, to Westminster, Scotland can go hang. So there is a hostile environment, largely for immigration, and it's a, it results in punitive ways of framing things, such as the 29,000 income requirement before you can bring partners or spouse over to the UK. Um, it was paused. What was being contemplated was not actually any sort of reduction, but an increase to 34,000. And this is a consultation going on. And that was the sad thing of what Cowcab Stewart said. Everything else she said was fine. But she said, we call upon the UK government to effectively do the right thing. Scotland, with its requirements, should not be in the position of having to call on the UK government to do the right thing. One, it won't do the right thing. Two, it won't take your views into account, most likely, in whatever it does. Scotland should be in a position to make its own decisions on immigration. There should be immigrations that are in Scotland's interests. Right now, that does mean increased immigration. It might not always, but any country should be able to run an immigration policy in its own interests. For Scotland, there's only one way to do that, and that's with independence. And the sooner people wake up to that, I would say, the better.
And with that, we will be wrapping up the show. Before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we run on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024, £16,000 short of our £36 target, but we were able to borrow that money to pay our bills and survive. The pressure is still on, and we need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. So for the type of broadcasting we do, if you want to see more of it, we will need more regular subscribers, and we need to clear our debts too. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford for £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate wherever you can. Thank you again to William Duguid for your insight and time today. It was good having you.
Lovely to be here.
And
Look
with
to
that, we
see
will
you
be
again
wrapping
soon.
up. See you next time.